Okay, so the first thing we want to do when we get out our dial bore gauge is to go ahead and just open the box. And, oh man, imagine that. If only we asked SAS students to put things back the way they came. I mean, we're missing spacers, missing some of the bore adapters. Man, this is why we ask people to put things back. So as you can see, the tool has been acetized, so we need to make sure that we find all of the pieces. Let's see, I think I got another kit around here. All right, so there we go. Now we got a full kit. It does have one slot that nothing actually goes into there. That's kind of extra when it got there. Okay, so when we have our dial bore gauge, what we're looking at here is number one, we have a dial. It's just your standard. Dial. Okay. You'll notice when we look on here. Let's turn it around so we can see it. It is a 0 to 0.25 inch gauge, and it is in 0.005 inches. Okay. So sorry, 0.0005 inches. So we have tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000. So this is going to read down to a half a 10,000ths, right, or 5 10,000ths. What we need to do is we need to set that up by putting it into the dial bore gauge handle, okay? And we need to get it down until it starts touching. If you need to loosen it up a little bit. So it starts touching, and just until it moves a little bit on the gauge. That means it's contacted inside of there, okay? And then we can tighten down the gauge. All right, you can put this wherever you would like, if you like the handle a certain way. I usually like to do it to where I'm looking at the front of the gauge when it's going to be facing towards the front of the measuring surface here, okay? At the front of this is where we have our gauge head. Okay, the gauge head is going to be where we're going to put the different anvils, okay? So we have our movable anvil right here, and if you look really close, I'll see if I can zoom in on this. The anvil is movable. You can see as I push it down there with my thumb, it is absolutely movable, okay? And when we push that down, I'm going to push it down over here. And when we're pushing this down, you'll notice, okay, I'm pushing it down my finger, it's moving. It's moving that dial, okay? So when it's all the way out, when the anvil is all the way out, it's sitting right there. I'll even put it on the 0 just to make it look good, okay? And then as I push that anvil in, it is going to start moving that dial, okay? As I'm pushing it in, that would indicate a smaller area, which means if it's turning to the right, it's a smaller area. Now as I let it go, and I let the anvil start coming back out, it's going to go to the left, which means if we were trying to measure for 4 inches, say, and we put the dial bore gauge in there and it went this way and then started coming back the other way, that would mean that that is a bigger hole than 4 inches, and going past the 0 would be a smaller hole than 4 inches. That's something to remember for later. Okay. The reason I keep saying 4 inches over and over is because that's the bore that we're going to be trying to measure. So we know that the standard bore on a 302, a 5 liter, is 4 inches. So we're going to grab the 4-inch adapter. Okay, and this adapter, the anvil on this side, it does not move. It does have, on the very tip, a little ball bearing, okay? But that's more so that it can glide smoothly along the edge of the cylinder and not mar the cylinder, so it has a nice smooth surface for it to glide across of. So now we should be set up to look for a 4-inch bore, okay? But there's one last thing we need to do. We got to go calibrate this. Okay, so before we go and calibrate this, I thought, you know, maybe I should talk a little bit more about this tool. Okay, so the adapters on the end, the different anvils that we have, like you saw, they're interchangeable. You unscrew this cap, okay, and you can pick a different one. I picked the 4-inch one because that means that from the movable anvil to the end where I had it, that is supposed to be about 4 inches. okay, which is adjustable then through the dial. All right, you see there's a multitude of different sizes. We have all the way from 2 inches up to 4 inches, so we can measure a 2-inch bore to a 4-inch bore, and they go in about 0.2 increments, right? 2, 2.2, 2.4, 2.6, 8, 3, 3.2, 4, 6, 8, up to 4 inches, okay? There's also these ones off to the left that are for a little bit smaller. There's a 2-inch, 1.8, 1.6, 1.4, and they also come with a separate adapter on the end, which if you notice as I push this in, let's see if you can see it, get in here, the anvil goes out, right? So that would push up, which would push our dial indicator. Okay, there's also extenders on here. There's another 2-inch extension here if you're going for a larger bore. If you were going for a 5-inch bore, 6-inch bore, something larger, you could stick this on the end. And then stick your anvil on. So there's 2 inches plus our 4. So if we were going for a 6-inch bore, now we could go for a 6-inch bore. And since it doesn't affect the backside, the movable anvil is still going to work. So you can use that adapter to extend it a little further. There's also these little shims up there. Okay, so let's say that we knew that our bore was 4.1 inches. Well, we could come over here to the 0.1 adapter and stick it on the end before we stick it into the tool. And now we can measure a 4.1 inch bore, okay? If we knew it was 4.15, there's a 0.05, there's a 0.02, and there's a 0.01. Okay, so depending on what you're trying to measure, you can use the different adapters to try and to measure different size bores. All right, so we have our dial bore gauge, and what we're going to do is we have it set up for hopefully about 4 inches, okay? So what I have here is a micrometer. I went ahead and grabbed the 3 to 4 inch micrometer, set it at 4 inches. So I know this is a true 4 inches, and what we're going to do is we're going to set the dial bore gauge to 4 inches, because a dial bore gauge does not actually measure anything, it just compares two measurements. So we have to set our initial measurement so that we know if we're at 4 inches or not. Okay, we're going to go ahead, and when we push this in here, place this in here, we need to place the moving anvil, okay, against the hard surface first, and then press in on it. If it's too small right now, it's a little too small. Okay, so we're going to press in on that. Actually, I'm going to flip this around so I can see the dial. And as we press in on that, we're going to see that the dial is not set at 0 when it's at 4 inches. Let me turn this dial so you guys can see it. Okay. So as I press in, okay, it does not fit in between the two anvils on the micrometer. So I'm going to press in on the movable anvil on the dial bore gauge until it's setting on the middle. The movable anvil's kind of in the middle on one side, and it's about on the middle on the other side. And you'll notice we're not at 0. And if we went up or we go down, it kind of moves that gauge in and out a little bit. Okay, and what we want to do is very carefully move the 0 point back around here to where it's going up and down. Okay, so we want it to go to the peak of its movement and come back and find that peak, and that peak's at 0. And if you look there, it's pretty much right dead set at 0. Okay, so now we do the exact opposite we did when we put this on here, and we push in on the anvil a little bit, rock it up, slowly release that anvil. You do not want it to snap, because if it snaps, that could change the measurements inside of here. Okay, that little bit of shock to the system might make it off 1/1000th. So now we're set up for 4 inches, and we can go measure our bore.